Well, this is a very long historical and personal article about the beginnings of the student movement, SNCC and SDS, and the, the call for participatory democracy at the founding convention in 1962, in that period, just that 2-year period. Participatory democracy is a jumbly phrase that came from the lips of my philosophy professor at the University of Michigan, Arnold Kaufman, in a seminar. He was quoting John Dewey, who was an elder of SDS, who had conceived of the idea that democracy should be broader than voting. It should include voting, but we should have democratic families, not dominated by the father from the top down. We should have democratic workplaces, democratic neighborhoods, not controlled by developers. More democracy, not less, was the idea. And of course, before John Dewey, there were proponents of civil disobedience and direct action like Henry David Thoreau, who we knew had said, vote yes, but vote with your whole life, not with a simple strip of paper. So we took that to heart. And for us, there wasn't a big conflict between direct action, sitting in at lunch counters, and registering black people to vote in the South, because you could get killed or arrested or beaten for either. It was all direct action, but at least there was a framework. It was more than a tactic of sitting in and occupying someplace. The framework was to push for more space for the human development that was at the center and the social development that was at the center of what we called participatory democracy. I would make the argument that participatory democracy, if understood, can be, should be, will be the only framework for the development of progressive movements and politics in the U.S. That's worth salvaging.
Welcome once again to the Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vrettos. We're taping the show on December 11th, the anniversary of what would have been the 85th birthday of Students for a Democratic Society leader, anti-war and civil rights activist Tom Hayden, principal actor and author of the Port Huron Statement, the seminal New Left manifesto for a generation of student radicals in the 1960s. Port Huron opens with a certain foreboding. We are people of this generation, bred in at least modest comfort, housed now in universities, looking uncomfortably the world we inherit. Ends despondently, yet defiantly, by saying, if we appear to seek the unattainable, as it has been said, then let it be known that we do so to avoid the unimaginable. Written in 1962, it could easily be mistaken for a call to action by student activists on many American university campuses today. Our guest on the Radical Imagination today is Alan Haber, Tom's comrade, friend, and first president of SDS, elected in 1960. Alan is director of the Megiddo Peace Project, an accomplished cabinet maker, vigorous advocate of the commons for public space, and the creator of the Peace Table, which served as the opening peace table in the 1990 Hague Appeal for Peace, the world's largest ever meeting for peace. It was designed by Alan to end the war system. No peace without a meeting, as he put it, and no meeting without a table. Alan lives in Ann Arbor, Michigan, with his partner, Olgie, who also has spent her life involved in ending the whole war system and then having a party, as she puts it, to celebrate its demise. Well, Alan, peace and blessings, and we're starting the party a little early here. The whole we've got some work to do still, but this is the start of the party. And thank you so very very much for doing this. And we'll get on to your own anniversary a little later in the show, because what's 51st year of an anniversary of something that happened to you that I'll have you explain. Um, but again, thank you so very 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 much for being here, and especially on this day, December 11th. Tom would have been 85, and you were there right at the beginning. And we're gonna in a few minutes show a clip where Tom does talk about you as the elder who helped in the writing of the Port Huron Statement. But bring us back just briefly to those very early days, and what were you doing, and how did you all meet, and just give our audience a little background of what was happening, let's say late 50s, 1960.
Well, I thank you for the opportunity to see what you might develop in this radical imagination. I became a student, a freshman at the University of Michigan. I grew up in Ann Arbor, so to speak, in 1954. And I was early on introduced to the freedom movement around the question of the firing of 3 professors for their refusal to cooperate with the House Committee on American Activities. And some elders for me, graduate students, were protesting. I was on my way to English class, and I going up the south stairway of Angel Hall, and looking over to my left, I saw a gaggle of people holding signs, and I'd never seen people holding signs. So I went over, I took a deviation to the left, as it were, to see what was going on, and they explained to me a lot of things, and they invited me into conversations in the basement of the Women's League, and I joined the movement, and soon was persuaded to begin a student organization to discuss political issues, because there was no political discussion on the University of Michigan campus or most other campuses. McCarthyism closed things down. And it was out of that political issues club that I was in the center of activities on campus, and Tom in 1960 became editor of the Daily, or in the Daily, and was in San Francisco, and he experienced the House Committee on American Activities and the Slate political party. And we met somewhere along the line. He is an editor, and he is some sort of activist. And SDS transformed the League for Industrial Democracy was our kind of patron, and we became the new SDS, transforming the Political Issues Club into a national endeavor. And Tom was witness to all that as an editor. And when I had occasion to go to Washington after he graduated and the SDS had already begun, I persuaded him that rather than become a professional journalist and join one of the corporations, he should become an activist and join the movement. And by the time we reached Washington, it was agreed. And
just like that. Well, actually, as Tom mentioned to me, yeah, this was largely your doing. That trip was crucial in convincing him that this needed to be done, that there needed to be the student activist organization, and that essentially you wore him down. Your arguments were such, and he said you weren't going to take no for an answer. So there it is. You really pushed the envelope and made this all happen. And
I persuaded him that
yeah,
an activist was in some sense in the media, that it was conveying a message. And he wanted to do that as a journalist, and he saw he could actually do that as a human being in the struggle. And he did that. He did that very well.
Yeah,
When we in the winter of 1961 were planning the next SDS convention, and the question was, it was in Ann Arbor, the question was, so what should we really do? And somebody whose name I don't remember called out from under the piano. It was a very full room. We should make a manifesto. And so that was sort of a consensus agreement. And I put out from the national office, I was president of the SDS, such as it was, to all the members of our whole list, we're making a manifesto, what should be in it? And people wrote back their different ideas, and I had them all typed out. And we made another newsletter that went out to say, this is what you said, and what's left out, and what should be changed. And people wrote back again. That got sent out again, and people wrote back again, and that got sent out. And all that material got given to Tom, along with a couple working groups, for Michael Vester from Germany, around. And
Stanley Aronowitz was also.
Yeah, the last work was in Sam's apartment on 21st Street or 19th Street. Anyhow, so that all got worked into a draft that then went to the convention, which divided, cut it all up into pieces in different workshops, and the workshops went over the draft, and we decided. This was a little change, let's call it a widget, and this is the big change, let's call it a bone, and we voted on bones and widgets and made an editorial direction to the redrafting of the draft, and that became the Port Huron Statement. So it was really much of a collective product. It was participatory democracy.
I was just going to say, Alan,
a creative project.
This is participatory democracy in action. And the collective, and it was a very few number of people, the total 40 or 50 or so. You know what I think would be helpful is let's listen to a short clip of Tom on Democracy Now, who explains to some extent what you've been talking about as well, how things got started. Influence of SNCC also. I want to get back to that. When you refer to the freedom movement, is that what you're referring to also? The Freedom Riders and so on, SNCC and.
Well, as we became SDS in 1959, and I was charged with the opportunity to define what would be our next big program or our next program. And this was a transition from the previous Student League for Industrial Democracy that was quite slid and more intellectual, and this was an activist time arising. And we decided we would have a conference on racism and discrimination in the North. And we decided that in August, September of 1959, and it was fortuitous that the sit-ins began on the 1st of February in 1960, and we were all set up for a conference at the end of April. SNCC was formed in the middle of April, and SNCC came to this, and labor movement came, and activists from North and South and black and white, and so we were the host of a real gathering of the movement and the generations. And the freedom of thought was really fundamental in that, which was the question on the Angel Hall steps with these people about academic freedom. Are people free to be free? So everything connected, and I became the first regional representative to SNCC. And when Tom joined in 1961, then he took that over, that relation with SNCC. I remember my first trip to Atlanta, I grew up in Michigan, and that's where I'm from, except for a few other travels. And so I was looking for Auburn Street, and I stopped at a red light, and somebody was walking across the street, and I had rolled my window. Can you tell me where Auburn Street is? And he raised up his hand. Heil Hitler! 3 blocks down and to the left.
Whoa! All right. Well, those were
That was my welcome to
yeah.
Atlanta.
Well, let's the welcome you didn't need here. Let's turn to Tom here in his own words for a short clip from and let's hear and listen to Tom and see what he had to say here.
Talk about where you were in 1960, 1961, when you wrote the Port Huron document.
I was the editor of the Michigan Daily in Ann Arbor. I had read Howl by Allen Ginsberg and On the Road by Jack Kerouac, and I was a big fan of James Dean and Rebels Without a Cause and Looking for My Cause. And I met the young black students from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and I fell in love with them. And it was because they were the alternative to the life of apathetic absurdity that faced those of us like myself. And they were doing something that they believed in at the risk of their own lives and careers and reputations. And I'd never met people who were willing to make that risk. And that was it. I was gradually converted to becoming an activist. It was not an overnight St. Paul kind of conversion. It was slow. But I came to realize, just as I think Juan did, that you can be a writer, a journalist, an autonomous person, and be deeply engaged and not a propagandist. You begin to see things, see realities by being involved.
So how did Port Huron happen?
I don't know. It was a miracle. It's like, how did Democracy Now! Happen? A few people said it must have been something in the air, something blowing in the wind, and we wanted to write an agenda for our generation, and 50 or 60 people did, and very inspired by SNCC. The first notes toward it were written by myself in an Albany, Georgia jail after a freedom ride. Some of the SNCC people came. They were trying to recruit us, and we wanted to do something about the lack of student power. Students couldn't vote. We could be drafted. There were dorm hours. People would make out with their dates, but there were dorm counselors that made everybody have 2 couples, 3 legs on the floor, please. I have to set the timing of this, 1960-62, very special time. So we decided we would write this manifesto, and a professor named Arnold Kaufman suggested we use the term participatory democracy. It also came from Ms. Ella Baker, who was the elder advisor to SNCC, who wanted the students in the South to have an autonomous movement, bottom-up movement, self-determined movement, and not just follow the elder clergy. And the components came together, and the statement was somehow produced, and it was called a living document because we thought it should be open to revision. The sentence you read that opened it is not exactly the Communist Manifesto. You know, it's like we're people of this generation, bred in modest comfort, looking uncomfortably. And so we're having a meeting at NYU that everybody's invited to all day today, a reflection. Many of the originals are there. And we're looking uncomfortably on the world we leave behind, perhaps. But Occupy it makes us all very happy, very, very pleased. We've seen this come before and go and come again. and it will.
Tom, and when you talk about some of the people who participated, talk about some of those early founders of SDS that were with you and that helped develop the original Port Huron Statement.
I can't name them all, and I hate to leave anybody out, but they're all at NYU. They're not relics. You can go see them. You know some of them.
Yeah.
Al Haber was the man carrying the idea of a student organization around. He was like the elder of the group. Rob Burledge, who I had dinner with last night, was a editor at the University of Texas newspaper. My first wife, Casey, was a sit-in leader and a kind of existentialist from Austin. There were student body presidents, student newspaper editors. SNCC people were there. Charles McDew, who's here in New York, was there. It's an interesting cross-section of about 50 people, that's all.
50 people. 50 people. That was back in 2012. And then they had the NYU conference. I don't know. I was there. Were you there? Were you able to attend that back in 2000? No, tell me.
I do remember some meetings at NYU just when
Right.
we were having a 50th anniversary, such as it was. There was a program in Ann Arbor. It was being reflected upon, and there was a move afoot to relook at the document in a fuller way, a Port Huron for now. And that didn't really materialize, but some way I felt that it was appropriate for the time because a lot had passed under the dam.
But Alan, as he mentions, this was a living document. So if I understand what you're saying, it ended there. I mean, why wasn't it, in a sense, revised, reformed?
The next year, we did something that looked much more around international affairs and imperialism, called America in the New Era, in 1963. In 1964, we did not try in that more about the Cold War. 1965, we looked at the whole educational character of the movement.
Okay.
So we never went back to pull everything together in our threads, and it seemed in that 50-year perspective that would be a good thing to do. And I attempted that at the University of Michigan, and the professor who was trying to who organized the Port Huron reflection here, and Tom was here also, and Casey, and a lot of the beginning people. He was glad to meet everybody, but he was not encouraging. He didn't use the opportunity to have people together to really look forward in a coherent way, which is anyhow.
Well, no. Was you raising some these movements are far and few between, and they're there for not very long periods of time. If you look at the past and so on. So when you talk about what happened, the demise of SDS, one of the explanations, or one of the things that we've talked about, we've had Mark Rudd on the show here, and I think you've been a critic of that, the turning of a more, if you will, violent, more militant SDS, and breaking up into factions that you found really, really dismaying. Is that true?
Well, I went to the West Coast in 1968. So
Okay.
what was happening in the East wasn't so much in my framework. I never put it that SDS broke up. It outgrew its form and spread in 100 different directions. And that was my perspective when I we looked at things in the mid-70s, that the movements in every form had never been stronger. That what was SDS and the anti-war movement and university reform and anti-draft movement had become the women's movement and the continuation of the civil rights and black movement and black power and the Native American movement and the Mexican movement and spiritual, and in every front. In every identity, there was an expression of what is our oppression, what is our vision, and all that was very much cohering out of the original sense of we are uncomfortably looking at what we inherit and leave behind. And there was a sense of a unity in the heart across all these different, this whole wide spectrum. And the direction that the Weatherman took of direct confrontation, multiplicity of tactics and all that, in some way reflected how the government was reacting to the activists and murdering Fred Hampton and a lot of other things. That
Right.
we were under siege, and in some way to respond to siege is to say, I met, if I may share this story, Diane Autumn in January of 1970 at the Red House in Berkeley. Tom had already left Berkeley, and I saw her there, and I asked her, "How did you get involved in this militant politics?" Tom and I had decided that we were not going to go for armament and armed confrontation. We had a long conversation about it in People's Park. Anyhow, she said, "Well, my love was for kids. I was a teacher. We had a beautiful school. We were touching the hearts of these kids and making them free before they got into the repression of the regular school system. And then the city comes and closes us down and said that we're not, our space isn't up to code, and we invite help from all the liberals, and we got no help, and they closed us down. That what we were doing so beautifully." And I realized at that point there are no liberals. There are a lot of people who show good words, but when it comes to actually doing anything, they cover their ass. And there's a war system that is murdering in Chicago, that is murdering in Vietnam, that is murdering anywhere in the world. And there are a few people who see it, and we are going to fight back in a militant way, same as they are militant against the human spirit. And I was pretty impressed with that. And then 2 weeks later, she's dead in the explosion in Manhattan, that that house there. And it was a beauty that people had that drew them into the movement. And when you are repressed in a brutal way and not respected and given dignity, one way is you fight back in a militant way. But that didn't really last very long. Right. So it is still a presence, and much more. It's the sense that we are a community and how we work together. And I think now, as the Pentagon defines the system we are in as full spectrum domination, that's Mission 2020, full spectrum domination. We have the opportunity to define our mission as full spectrum cooperation. And seeing across all our different lines of division, there are commonalities, and it's the human spirit that we cherish. And that's what really kind of brought me and Tom together way back when. And it's a future if we can make ourselves seeing that way.
No, yeah. Very good point. No, makes some very, very wonderful, important points here. Wonder if you agree. I know that Tom felt that the last best chance we had in electoral politics was Bobby Kennedy, and he, more than any other politician, white politician, certainly held a population that you were trying to reach, that he could have made the difference if he was elected. Do you agree with that? Or he was the one that could have maybe really taken this coalition you're talking about, the commonality, all the different identity groups, and brought them together against the permanent war economy? Or you're shaking your head? No?
No,
I agree.
it was right there. The turn came with the assassination of John Kennedy, when the war people just said, we're in charge and forget all this peacemaking
Yeah.
stuff. And you raise your head and you get it blown off. And the war powers have been in charge ever since. And Bobby Kennedy was one person who knew what had happened to John, and he was ready to take them on, and was a pretty good-hearted guy. So I thought that was he was a good hope. But the war party is not going to tolerate that, or anyone rising in that form of leadership from above. And we really needed to see how do we rise from below. And that's where all the people are. And we are all connected in our networks. And that's what I experience as I look over my own connections. It is people to people to people to people. And that's where trust lies. And the movement broke up a lot because we were infiltrated by COINTELPRO and people who had a government disruption agenda in their mind, rather than turning apart and bringing us closer together. So that kind of introduction into the movement by bad energy led to the fragmentation and attracted smaller groups.
Yeah, and you really haven't had much of that sort of positive energy you're talking about, certainly politically, since then. There was certain hopes raised with Obama, but he turned out to be, again, as Cornel West would put it, I don't know if you agree with Cornel on that, but I should probably do, that he was just a caretaker for the military as well, for the plantation. By the way, I'm just out of curiosity, what do you think about Cornel West's candidacy? And I think he goes back to some of the things you've been talking about to build a movement, a party in this case, although he calls it a moment in a movement of peace and justice, and with radical love, with a lot of the spiritual progressiveness that you also have exhibited and talk about so eloquently.
Well, I've never had the pleasure to meet him. I did listen to one pretty long speech he gave, and I thought it was right on. I think he came out of the freedom movement and was translating that into daily life from the bottom up, and was keeping that perspective and not getting caught up in being the leader of something that had a mass. He was of the people and saying what needed to be said. Unfortunately, the political system does not allow that to be a winning program.
Absolutely.
Similarly, for Gil Stein, who said a lot of right-on things, that when I had my parting with Tom, is when he thought that it was beneficial to go into the electoral mode. And I thought at that time it was that the movements had never been stronger and we should take an independent mode in the 1976 election. And in some way, I think that our situation again, coming at Trump, and everybody is very uneasy and looking at their basic interests and feeling under threat, that is an activation of the entire community towards self-consciousness. And if we can see how we draw ourselves together, looking at the 2026 election as the first response to the Trump administration, and the 2028 is actually having an independent voice for a new government.
Could you just, yeah, Alan, just a couple minutes. When you talk about that independent voice, what are you're talking about? Actually, party building, an attempt by an independent party to challenge the two other parties, or still work outside the system? What do you mean by that?
I consider that if we have a series of meetings of all the different struggle elements and begin to put together what is a common program that will involve a lot of intercommunication and facilitation, that the people who in that process actually are most effective in knitting together the diversity of our unity will be the people who could best represent us in a leadership in a new government that would carry out that program. So the leadership has to really come out of the process of knitting together the elements of the people. And that would be the last people chosen, not the first. That the need that we have is to change the structure of power from a unitary power at least to a shared power, and from a power above to a power from below. And the running of a political campaign should be that way. And when I envisioned this in 1976 and went to the Federal Election Commission, could actually a group of people get together and declare that Jill and Jack are going to go up the hill for us and they're carrying a program, and people can write them in. And if enough people write them in, can they win? Well, actually, it's never been done, but it could be done. It's not illegal. If people know what they want, because they're actually involved in the process of bringing movements together and that they care about what's being done, they'll know that it's Zalman and Esther who are going up the hill rather than Jill and Jack or whoever it is. But those names will come at the end, not at the beginning.
Right. So
I think the shift that is needed, and Tom, I think, was caught in the sense of personal leadership. And I think we have to see a different form of collective, because we saw clear enough how COINTEL works, that if you identify yourself as out in front, either you got to be covering your head all the time, or you're going to be covered in a black sheet.
So it sounds like you think that at that point he had given up to a certain extent in the belief in participatory democracy, in the organic growing of a leadership that would reflect the needs of the great majority.
I think he saw there was a move that could be made. It could be beneficial. It was a good opportunity. He's going to do it. He's been working his life to express, here's a place he can go. And the Democratic Party doesn't work that way. And we got a Republican senator for too long. But also Tom's own sense of himself, I think, got limited. And when he was in the state legislature, he never came to Berkeley as a legislative ally of the fragmented movement there. He sort of shifted his orientation to inside that world, which he did very well in there. But we really need the voices that can go from the street to the legislative hall somehow. I think there's a lot of possibility because people are worried about what's coming down with this Trump or with the people he is choosing. Yeah, he's a pretty scattered character, and no telling what he's going to do. So he may decide, okay, it is the time to end all the wars and make more money with the windmills.
Right. But again,
not likely, but
right.
keep up the communication.
So would you put AOC and Bernie in sort of the same breath here as this futile attempt to transform the Democratic Party, or they also sort of become part of it for their own? I don't know what you want to call it. Let's not call it ego, but that this is their vision of what the best that can happen. Or would it have been better for Bernie?
I think that it's the best vision of what can happen. I think Bernie seems to have a lot of integrity, and our revolution is trying to carry this forward. And he or we did not have the pizzazz inside the Democratic Party to keep him from getting squashed out of the picture. But
I want to. Yeah, Alan, I want to ask you what you thought of the student protesters today. Do you see elements of an anti-war movement in particularly this vision by many students who are taking pro-Palestinian stands, or do you? It's certainly different than. Well, you tell me what you make of that. Do you think that this is something that a larger anti-war movement can be built on? This particular issue seems to be the one that is taking so much energy of these young people. And would you like to see them expand it into including much more than just their concern with Palestine, even though that, of course, is important? And the last part is, can we make this into a sort of issue of traumatized peoples on all sides?
yes.
And that's what I want to get to. And maybe we can turn to the great Jewish prophetic tradition and help us on that, because I don't see that happening. I saw it. By the way, I supported Cornel West greatly. We had a fundraiser for him here. We've done events. He's been on the show numerous times. We protested stop and frisk together and so on. But he got 50,000 votes. Ridiculous. If he had the form, he had the message, he has the charisma. I think what was he? He was called. He had the energy of a James Brown with a PhD. So I mean, okay. So I'm going on here, but I want you to try and. I know we have mutual friends with Michael Lerner and Reb Zalman and Arthur Waskow and so on. So speak to us about Susanna Heschel, some of the progressive Jewish voices that speak to your heart, and how that can be incorporated into a larger vision of transformation of America and the world. That's a large question.
Yeah, really. I got 3 minutes. Yeah, Heschel prays with his feet.
Yeah.
Action. That always impressed me, that sense of, and I just hosted here Eric Eshelman, who works on the West Bank with Palestinian farmers.
Yeah.
Description of what is going on. There is no protection for the Palestinians. He ended his letter with "Be the dove." Not show that there is a dove there with an olive branch, but it is our task to be the dove, to be that life force that is now regenerating on the earth and allowing humanity to resettle. Be the dove. Think of yourself in that term, not that the dove is a passive image. And I think it's between the monetized, organized state and humanity is two different ways of being in the world. And the monetized organized state is what has the power and the guns. Humanity is what has the people in the heart. And I think that we can indeed communicate among the people and the heart toward a sense we really need a new time, that this war system has led us to the brink of catastrophe. I would put it the war makers should just lay down the guns for a brief time and listen to the peacemakers for a change and let their heart be touched. Because if this continues with these escalations and if there's, the peace award was just given to the survivors of the nuclear bombs in Japan, that they keep this memory alive of what these horrendous weapons can do. And the killing goes on in Gaza right now, and in Somalia, and in Sudan, and in Yemen, and in Myanmar, and in so many places. There is a war system of domination, and the people in our families aspire, while it's a patriarchal inheritance that we are saddled with, do aspire to some sense of equality and sharing and love among us all. And turning the heart is one way. And to show that all these different struggles really have a sense of human freedom at their core, and that everybody should and could want that. So I do hope somehow that that element of the message could begin to see people. How do we, next choice time, which is the midterm election, actually put forward the elements of what would be a new government and a new political philosophy.
And Alan, where would you like to see the peace table be placed now? 1990. I'm talking about 2025 here. Where should it be? Who would you want there? Let's get this going.
Well, ideally, in some way, I would like Mr. Trump and Mr. Putin and Mr. Netanyahu and Mr. whoever is Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran. I think the major political powers that are on the edge of the gun should be there and should have these people there to say it is really possible to translate what you see as battlefield questions into discussion questions that cares for the well-being of everyone, and that there needs to be some kind of redemption in this. If there was actually a decision to make to end the war system, the criminals of the war system would join in that only if there was also that their act would be a redeeming act.
Redeeming it. Yeah.
Because there was just something. How come Putin does what he does? Because if he didn't do what he does, he'd be out of power and they'd kill him. Likewise, Netanyahu. Likewise, all these people. In some way, the warriors keep going because they so tarnish their souls that they cannot look at themselves out of that context. So it's.
I agree with you, Alan. I agree with what you're saying there. I know we've had combatants for peace. I don't know, know some of these groups. They've been on the show together. I just met also people from Standing Together, Palestinians and Israelis together, who have suffered and been so traumatized, are reaching out to each other. I think this is what we desperately need. I would like to see more of that among the protesters on campus. I don't think they get that.
The encampment at the University of Michigan, that went about a month before they sent in the police, was the most beautiful thing I had experienced in all my. Now I'm in my 89th year.
Yeah,
it was beautiful. It was the creation of community, and taking an open space, bringing food, bringing art, bringing ideas, bringing faith, bringing experimentation, bringing a revolution until liberation. It was beautiful.
Revolution to liberation. I like that very, very much.
Yeah, that's what that's on one of the T-shirts.
Yeah.
And it was the university could not stand it. Eventually, the University of Michigan destroyed the people's library and the art that people brought there and created and donated. Besides destroying
yeah.
It's they are up against their own moral limits that they would, rather than see this as a beautiful manifestation of the university at its best and engage in public questions, they saw it as a threat to their authority. And
absolutely. Alan, we have 1 minute. I'd love to hear what you, and then we're going to play the final song is Keep On Trucking. So that's what you're doing, what we're trying to do. What are some final thoughts, memories? What would you like to say in the last few seconds that we have if Tom was able to join us here?
We did have a beloved community. It was sort of declared by some elders, and we could see ourselves as part of that. And in some ways, that's, again, what we need to see in each other, that we are part of a beloved community, that there is a linkage in the heart that is a possibility for a new future. So I'm glad I could meet you a little more. And
absolutely. And thank you so much.
And Freddie, and how we keep ourselves together and see that we are part of something larger than ourselves, and try and make that more and more manifest without trying to name it. I call it the union, the unlimited network,
Yes.
integrating our nations. First, I just thought of it as union, and then somebody turned it into an acronym. But that is what we need, an unlimited network that integrates our nations all around the world.
Right.
And
unlimited network integrating our nations. Absolutely.
Union.
We have to get that on another show. And of course, what Oldie has to say, have a party. We need to have a party. And she meant a good time too. And as well as a party. So thank you. We're over time. Thank you so very, very much, Alan. It's really a blessing to meet you again. And I hope at some point we can really meet in person. And thank you so very, very much for being on the Radical Imagination.
Okay. Well, it was good to see you more and be ready to get me engaged here. We'll see what all happens. So is your program every week, every month? What do you do?
We're weekly. We're weekly. We're on every Sunday and numerous times during the week. But Freddie will tell you about that. But I think we're going to end the recording and talk about all that. We get around.
Everybody should listen, and you send me a message when
we will send you the link, and you spread it around the world as you can. So again, thank you. That was Alan Haber, and happy birthday, Tom. We miss you. Take care, everyone. This is Jim Vrettos. We'll see you again next week on The Radical Imagination.